a film to watch multiple times. Mm-hmm. So much of it, I think, really clicks together on a second watch when you know what's coming. Mm-hmm. But to start, RaMell, I wanted to know, this very specific, interesting perspective that you use, the POV style shooting. How was that introduced in the script? How was it written into the script as a style element to it? And I'm also curious how it was received when you all read the script and saw that we could involve that.
Yeah, it's a good question because it's tough to not, in Q&As and in interviews and stuff, to not be particular about words, just because I think we use words in a very intentional manner, and so it's so hard sometimes for people to hear, what do people say for the POV? They're like, this POV style. I'm like, what does that have to do with style? Like, what style? Like, this isn't, POV is, one, what we believe that we were trying to attempt was something that's more sentient, we called it a sentient camera, right? And it comes from the idea of trying to make the camera an organ, right? Like the way that cinema and cameras, at least in Western logic and Western ideology, the way that it exists, it kind of fundamentally objectifies, right? Like it's a pointing thing, it's separate from the thing itself. And it seems like a conceptual idea, but when we talk about representing people, and when we talk about it replacing the perception of you perceiving a culture and a people in a place across time and across meaning, it becomes something that just feeds your stereotypes of it. And your stereotypes, like my stereotypes, are quite often programmed by the ideology of the culture that you're in. And the camera is a dangerous thing, also a brilliant thing, it does a thing for memory, et cetera, et cetera. And so for us, taking the camera into the body of the characters, into Elwood and Turner, into the Dozier schoolboys, was a way to allow you to experience the kind of the gift of life that cinema can give to historical figures and to people in general. The Dozier School for Boys is a school in Florida that closed in 2011, which is wild. It was opened in 1900, closed in 2011, bodies began to be exhumed in 2013. And so the Dozier School boys are my dad's age, Franklin Leonard, who founded the Blacklist and stuff. He was when he realizes that's kind of when he kind of really broke, that his father was essentially the same age as them. And so for us, in taking the writing approach, we're okay, if we're gonna take seriously the camera being in the body, then we have to make images, we have to write the script visually as if we're making meaning by what they're looking at and what they're seeing, which then allows the audience, if you participate and you kind of let go when you're in the film, to be kind of locked into the way that they're making meaning through the world that looks at them in a certain way, and through the way they look at the world based on the conditioning of all those things. So it's very much a deeply spiritual thing that I can get on a high horse about, as you can tell, and get kind of emotional talking about it, because I want people to realize so much that it's not maybe it'd be fun to tell the story, what if we just, it'd be so cool to just have the character be the camera, It's no, Black people have always been objectified, have always been looked at. Most films and the logic of cinema history is not shooting from the Black community, it's shooting at the Black community. It's not the universal. How do you centralize the gaze inside Black subjectivity in the way that literature is allowed to do, in the way that Toni Morrison has been writing all this time? It's something that we all took deeply, deeply, deeply seriously.
Yeah. Jomo, from kind of the technical perspective, what were those challenges like? Looking beyond what exactly you wanted to accomplish, but how you were going to accomplish those things.
Yeah, I think, as RaMell's saying, it's from the first conversation we had, RaMell said he wanted to shoot point of view. So then it really became a question of asking ourselves, okay, what does that mean on a practical level in terms of filmmaking, and what does that mean in terms of, simple things like what's a cut, what's a transition, what's an insert, really what are some of these real building blocks we have for cinema? So a lot of it was, in prep, RaMell and I kind of twofolded that. We designed every single scene as a whatter. We knew that we were going to edit, but we knew that entering the camera into the actor's space in this way, there's a lot of artifice there. So anything we could kind of do to get that artifice out of the way. So a lot of the lighting was done with mirrors and broader and bigger light units that we pushed inside the space. So ideally there wouldn't be any stands or any lights on set to kind of try to build that out. And in building those wonders, kind of talking about, okay, every single tilt, pan, adjustment, movement through space we kind of wrote down. And through that process, we had a DSLR with us, and we would just test things out. We would, okay, let's try a hug. And it's well, this kind of looks weird. Maybe if we come in from the top and come down, that'll feel more natural. And it was really just having conversations about cinema at an almost subatomic level of okay, well, what is an establishing shot, actually? Yes, we understand it's a wide shot, usually in a space, but let's break that down a little bit further, where it's okay, an establishing shot is primarily a wide shot that is about, if our protagonist is in the image, what is our protagonist's relationship to the space that they find themselves in? Is it a hostile space? Is it a not hostile space? What are the dynamics? And so then within POV language, since we can't have that shot, it becomes, okay, maybe the shot is it starts walking into a space and we come to a countertop and it's about, what's the countertop made out of? Is it marble? Okay, that probably says something about socioeconomics of that space. And then we look down and we see, a tattered side of our protagonist's shirt. And so that also tells us something probably about the socioeconomics of the person's body in which we inhabit, and probably the dynamic between how comfortable they are in this space and how comfortable the people are with them in their space. So then it's okay, well, again, so a lot of those kind of conversations of thinking more quantum level about cinema and then rebuilding, remodulating this stuff for our language. But again, that just came with a lot of conversations, watching a lot of movies together and kind of breaking those things down, and also a lot of camera tests where, as a cinematographer, what RaMell was after and creating the sentient image was unlike anything I'd ever done, and nothing that I had ever really seen in the way that he was describing it. So, that really took our entire team, me, our camera team, our G&E team, kind of having to almost unlearn everything that we thought we knew about cinema, and then trying to just show up and execute the thing that RaMell was asking for, which was a very particular, bespoke thing. So towards that, it was testing everything, testing story cams, testing remote heads and mimic mode on dollies, moving them through space, doing handheld, and then feeling the difference between handheld that comes from your shoulder and handheld between your hands, of being able to quickly articulate. It feels more like a neck than if you're doing handheld with the camera on your shoulder. So yeah, it really just came from testing a lot of things. And RaMell and I and our colorist Alex Bickle, sitting in a theater and looking at it on a theater, all of our tests, being okay, what feels emotional? What's working here? And if something's working, just raise your hand or say, I'm feeling this. And that kind of became a lot of what the project was again, thinking about the emotions of these characters, these real boys moving through a real space, and thinking about their gaze, how powerful that is, when quite literally what they look at is the difference between life and death for them moving through the Jim Crow South. And then taking that and saying, okay, technologically, what are the tools that we can reach for that makes us feel inside their body in a present tense way? That was really a lot of it was conversation and testing.
Right. You mentioned mirrors, and something that I really responded to, especially the second time I watched it, were the reflections in the film. Obviously, I think that they give a sense of, especially where we see Elwood at the years, but the one sequence that really, and I don't even know if it's a question as much as just a comment, because I'm astounded by the moment in the film very early on where Elwood is in the window of the department store. We see all the TV shows, the TVs turn on Martin Luther King's speech. The first time I watched it, wasn't quite clear what I was looking at because my eyes were adjusting to it. The image of Elwood kind of revealed himself to me very slowly in a very beautiful way. This time I think I was expecting it, and I was there he is, I see him. But I'm curious about—
Can I add something really quick?
Yeah.
I look at Nick because we like slowly
Yeah.
faded Elwood in literally on
Okay.
screen, so
Yeah.
that he was transpiring to you.
Yeah, totally.
Was something that we did. It wasn't your eyes. It
Yeah.
actually happened, which is kind of cool.
Well, I think because I knew he was coming the second time I saw him
Yeah.
earlier. But no, I think that was a really amazing moment. But I guess to set that into a question, how did you use mirrors and reflections as a storytelling device? It's not just something to catch the light to show us another part of the image.
Yeah, I think that, it's a funny thing in the movie where I think that, if I'm allowed to pontificate for a moment as like a viewer, I think that something I have been learning over the course of watching this movie is what the point of view for me does is that in traditional cinema, you look at a close-up. And in the close-up, you kind of see from a great actor their performance, like what are they doing with their face? And you read, okay, well, what is Elwood feeling? He's feeling this because I'm seeing on the face of the actor him experience some emotion. And then that is what's telling me what is happening to Elwood. And I think in this movie, because you don't have that information, you're kind of unmoored. And so then looking at the image, it's less of, oh, what's Elwood feeling, but more like, okay, since I don't have access to that information, like, what's Elwood feeling based on where his eyes going around the room? And then I think secondarily, almost very quickly, the question that comes up where it's like, well, since I don't know and I can't say for sure what Elwood's feeling, man, what would I feel in this situation? What would it feel like for me to have a cane poked into my stomach and the small injustice of that moment to just be a Tuesday? To not really be a particular moment, but something that still sticks out. How would that feel? And I think that does do something different to an audience member interpreting an image within the context of cinema. That, yeah, I think is different. And I think when it gets back to that idea of the reflection is like, I think that each moment that RaMell kind of mobilizes these reflections or almost these moments where you're checking back in on like, oh, that's what I look like in this story. And again, I think that it's like, it's not that different than traditional cinema. I would say it's almost like 2 degrees off axis. But I think that small difference of being 2 degrees off axis kind of fundamentally changes how our brain interprets the image. Because again, it's still saying the thing of like, oh, that's what I look like. Instead of, oh, that's what the character looks like. It's like, oh, I've been seeing like, I think that for me, it's still so revelatory what Nick and RaMell did when you play that scene back in the cafeteria where you get to see Ethan for the first time is like, oh, that's who I am. Like, and I think not to be hyperbolic, but it gives me the same kind of feeling in 2001 Space Odyssey when the boat is thrown in the air and you cut to the space station of like, oh, these are the same primates. Like finally we're getting to see why I was watching 40 minutes of apes is to understand that they're just humans.
Right.
And I think that there is something that felt revelatory to me when I watched it, of kind of getting to see Ethan when I've weirdly been in his body for like, 30 minutes of the movie up until that point.
Right. Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say that RaMell, you and Jocelyn were so specific and spoke so like, I don't know, you thought about so many layers of when we went to those reflections and why, and how they represented these specific moments of self-understanding or a changing in Elwood's kind of understanding of himself. Anyway, I just, not to speak for you, but it was like, I just remember how clearly it was like, that's there exactly for these reasons,
Yeah.
and not there was an intuitive part of it that made sense, but it was very clearly planned that way.
Yeah.
Ethan and Brandon, I'm very curious about your collaboration, I would say, because we get to see you on screen together for really one sequence. But the bond that your characters have is so vital. The bond that, the friendship that gets them through this experience is so important to the story. I'm very curious, how is it building the chemistry between the two of you as actors when you're not necessarily scene partners in the traditional way?
You said how was building?
Yeah, like
chemistry?
what was kind of the process between the two of you to like kind of build the chemistry that your characters would have when we don't really get to see you on camera. So I feel like it's a I'm curious if the process was at all different for you.
I mean, when we're not on camera, we can look at each other. So yeah, I mean, I think we clicked pretty quickly in the chemistry read. Yeah. Yeah.
These guys were like best friends. When we, because it was all over Zoom at first, we saw both Brandon and Ethan in a room, and I remember we like pressed the mute button, and then like Jocelyn and myself were like, how long have they known each other? Like, whoa, it's like really cool that we're casting friends,
Right.
you know? And then, but that was the first time they were meeting. Like that's that kind of, the alchemy that existed. And in fact, I'd say that the genuine most difficult thing about directing these two was subtly and outwardly reminding them where they were in their relationship relative to the story. Because they have such a chemistry, like even when they're doing the reads and they're acting the characters, there'll be subtle ticks that's like, yo fam, we're gonna go to Waffle House later. You know, just like built into the way in which they kind of are, because they're really good friends. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, Waffle House is how we became friends. lots of Waffle House. As for, I think, and that did so much to when we had to perform and we weren't going to have each other anymore. We would still be there. You know, if it was Elwood's POV, I'm right up on Jomo's back. If it's Turner's, he's right up on Jomo's back. So, we knew that the other was going to be there, and we were open to the whole experience of, kind of playing it all to camera. And I think, yeah, because we trusted each other, that creates a space in which we're able to be open and to explore this thing, and know that Brandon's still going to be present in the scene with me in the same way that I'm going to be present with him, even though we're not on camera. So yeah, being able to have that in this new environment and exploring this new way of making a movie is it's a blessing, because I don't know how it would have worked if I did not like him.
Or maybe Jomo, because you're kind of in the middle of it too. I mean, you're kind of right in there.
It also gave us a really amazing opportunity to get closer to the crew in a way that I never have before, to be able to establish a relationship with Jomo and with the other camera operators and with other members of the crew. Because, man, when you're watching it, they did such a great job of, they're all oneers, which really allowed us to, get immersed in the scene during our takes, and there's so much like open space, that you can see, but for us, it's like 270 degrees of open space and the world that these characters are living in that you're able to see. And then that remaining, 90 degrees is the camera and the crew all right in front of us performing. So I'm glad that we had the opportunity to get close to everyone, because, it's not just Brandon that I have to feel comfortable exploring this material with. It also has to be the crew who is going to be directly in front of me, that we have to trust, and that eventually has to fade away so that we can, deliver our performances.
I'm curious if kind of performing with the crew at that close proximity kind of added a vulnerability at all to your performance, or kind of put you in a different position that allowed you to kind of get into character, or to think as a character in a different way? And if it's no, that's okay too.
I'm not sure if it's the proximity of the crew. I mean, it must have had an effect. As Ethan's saying, there's a lot that we had to kind of let disappear and dissolve in order for us to feel like we're actually in a space and only talking to one another while we're staring down the lens. But I think in hindsight, there's a lot of different aspects of the way that we made it that did shape our performance, like the aspect of being so physically stifled, because when we're staring down the camera, we're not moving. I mean, sometimes I was in the wheelchair kind of rolling around, but for the most part, we're just very still and not moving our bodies at all. And that, I think, very much,
communicates to the position that these boys are in, of just being stuck in this confined space, being forced in this moment. So yeah, it's interesting that some of these new ways of exploring it did very much inform the way that we explored.
Nicholas, to talk about kind of putting all this together, I mean, maybe the question about kind of finding the friendship between these two boys on camera is something that happened in post-production, or something that you worked through and trying to figure out how to capture their chemistry and their bond, at least so that the viewer would see it, or before they feel it as well.
I mean, I think the most direct way to sort of, I can think to encapsulate that is like, it was really easy, honestly, in a lot of ways because of the work that was done on the set, but that's not quite, it's a little too simple, because it's like, it was very clear, but that in the same way that how clear the intention was between all the movements and the camera, because aspects of the performance, the growing relationship between them was already being thought about, and were they making eye contact yet, or were they kind of looking away a little more? It was really built in. But I think all that clarity means that when you get to a cut point, there's so much writing on those cut points. You can't just do it because you kind of don't love what happens right after, or like everything has this pressure on it to be a development, or all the attention on those moments, I think, just gets like hyper focused. So in a way, and which is kind of in a way my favorite, or one of my favorite ways to edit, which is really like every choice we're making there's lots of levels it's got to work on. You can't just cut on action and be like, that's fine, no one will notice that cut. It's like there's a reason why. And so anyway, when it relates to there were times, I guess, when we had to continue the language that you guys had formed in your body language and how you were relating to each other, aka the camera, and how you had, in the filming of it, decided when they were connecting more or less. There were times when it had to come to a cut point and we were like, or it should come to a cut point for lots of reasons, and how do you continue that feeling? Do we go to another moment of Turner's POV from a Turner POV, or do we go to an Elwood POV and express the difference between the places they're in right there? And so I think we had to just kind of hone into the logic that was already embedded in the footage and the performance, and try and not break it with the edits, or if we wanted to break it intentionally, choose a moment to really say, oh wait, I wasn't expecting that one to work that way, and why are we seeing that now? And that opens up a new set of questions for it. So. But the groundwork that was there made it all about the way we were affecting the meaning, rather than trying to create that relationship, I think.
Yeah, right. Sort of last question, and this is also for Nicholas and for RaMell, but about the kind of archival footage that we see in the film, the found footage we see throughout the film. I was very curious about the placement of those things, finding the right spots for them, and also, the importance of that to kind of give a larger context in the story. RaMell, if you wanted to start.
Yeah, it's like I think a lot of the filmmaking decisions. I'm in like a really a broody, moody mood right now. It's a turtleneck. Yeah, so I'm like getting in. It's like, why am I feeling this way? I don't know what's going on, but yeah, there's something to me about the way that cinema largely, and I say this respectfully and also generally, because there are artists that are doing the craziest things outside of the commercial space. In the commercial space, like I haven't even seen it all, but there's something about kind of industrial cinema that just like squishes down meaning to its minimalist point, where it just gives you entertainment and makes you feel a little bit smart by understanding something in a film, and then you get this really quality experience. You're entertained and you're just like, man, what a film! Like, that was crazy. What a narrative! Like, what visuals! But and it's escapist, and we need escapism because the world is crazy. But to me, in relationship to people of color, in relationship to the camera, and in relationship to cinema, I'm interested in complexity, and I'm interested in depth, and I'm interested in learning about myself and other people and the visual field and the world, while also engaging in what cinema can do, this wild sensory thing. And so the archive is a space that is just replete with meaning that we mine daily in the academy, in news, like in many different ways. It's a place where we attempted to have the Nickel Boys narrative, the Dozer School narrative, be engaged in the larger cultural conversations that are going on. Not just the conversation about Black trauma, not just the conversation about, what happened in Florida to these boys. Like, the way that these boys, the way that people of color around the world have been looked at by dominant gays in the world is the reason why the boys were able to be treated that way. Is the reason why in that community there was as Aunjanue says so succinctly, a conspiracy of silence. So within that idea, it's like, how can we employ the archive and its meaning that's untapped, that is really utilitarian, given the context that a lot of these images were made? How can we rescue people from being trapped, from the end of their visual life publicly, being trapped in this archive, rescue them from there, and have them be part of a larger cultural conversation? How can we imply the production of Blackness through cinema by showing you the range in which people of color have been engaged with over the course of history with the camera, from defiant ones, from government footage, from news footage, from the Black Family Archive, which Bell Hooks says is the only site for resistance amongst the other gays. And then you see the way that Jomo and I shot this film. Like, how many Black people do you know were giving imagination space in a Pulitzer Prize winning book over the history of cinema? I know one, maybe Barry Jenkins, maybe. I'm not sure if Underground Railroad got a Pulitzer, but it's not something that happens, right? But we think about images, we care about these things, and there's a genuine fundamental poetry that we're always trying to show the world. Like, this is literally how we see the world. Like, we photograph each other at all times like we're brothers, we like to say, what if the history of using the camera, you're only photographing people like they're your family? Like, the images would just look different, because you don't want images of your mom in a certain way being out in the world, because that's not your mom, like the way this person's gonna interpret it. So the archive was a space for us to put that in contrast. Like, Jomo and I, we got to do our thing. They gave us space to do our thing, and look at the way that we've been produced otherwise, and that makes for us the most contemporary archive as Nickel Boys.
Well, I think that's all we have time for today.
Sorry, Nick.
I'm sorry.
What he said.
Exactly. Thank you all so much for joining us, and thank you all so much for joining us, and congratulations on this incredible film.
I didn't want to present it.